It's time for the big show with Andy Gallo and Country Jim.
Well, hello, everybody. I'm Andy Gallo.
And I'm Country Jim.
And our guest is
Sam Sattler.
Glad to have you on the podcast with us, man.
Great to be here, guys.
Historian, one of the early internet radio stations. Right. About 2003, I think it was?
September 2003, we started Ram Radio. Right?
Now, what inspired you to do that?
Well, country music was in bad shape by 2003 as far as radio played. Amounted to much. FM stations especially. There were still some good AM stations, but you had to find them. You had to look for them. Mm-hmm. And we were a little bit concerned that people were going to forget what country music really was. And so we learned about internet radio just one night on a chat line. We were talking, and I think I brought it up, and nobody knew anything about it. So we researched it and found out how easy it was to start a station, and we decided we would do that and at least try to play the real stuff. Mm-hmm. And we did that for about 4 years, till the end of 2007. Mm-hmm. We did it, but it was primarily to push the real music, and it turned into let's search for the local bands that are still doing it. Mm-hmm. And I had a partner in Oregon and a partner in New York who did the same thing, searching for local bands and gathering up the old stuff. And before we were done, we had close to 25,000 songs in our library.
Wow.
And it had them in what we called a vault at the time. It was also online. And we took requests from the vault and ran our own top 40 listing. And just really pushed the music, and being as early as we were in the game, Andy, I think paid off because we got a lot of attention from the artists. Before it was over, we interviewed people like Mel Tillis and several other guys of a little less stature but well-known names, and just really had a lot of fun with it because people seemed to really appreciate what we did. Mm-hmm. But toward the end, it got tough. Mm-hmm. It got tough. We did average probably 2,500 listeners a day. But and some of them would listen all day long. Some of them would listen 15 minutes. Mm-hmm. You know how that goes. But we got a lot of feedback. And
so was it a 24-hour station?
It was a 24-hour recorded station. We played on a loop.
That's what I was just about to ask you. Was it live or did it something that y'all pre-recorded?
We pre-recorded it. We got a lot of promos from the artists that we would insert here and there to make it sound like a commercial radio station. Sure. We had, we got it from Dale Watts and Jim. We worked with Dale real closely for a couple of years, pushing him out of, pushing his stuff out. And we did a little bit of live disc jockeying, but they frowned upon it at the time. They didn't really. There was a competition that developed a lot sooner than we ever dreamed it would between us and commercial radio, and so the people that we were using as a server really didn't like live stuff going out there very much. So it ended up becoming more and more recorded, but we would record a lot of conversation in between songs and insert it, where it was appropriate.
Right.
We had my daughter, Miss Leslie, on one of the podcasts. Tell about, I guess that's kind of the way I met you, too. Tell about that. It
was. In my search for local artists, probably late 2003. I don't know what month the Crawfish Festival is in Conroe, Jim.
October.
So it's probably October. We started in September. Mm-hmm. And I was looking for local bands, and I heard about Miss Leslie's group and decided to see if I could sit down with her and talk about it. And we met in Conroe during the festival, I think right before she went on, right before her set, and got acquainted. And she got us some music, and we started playing it. And then, of course, I met Jim as a result of that, and a lot of other local bands. Because it seemed like that was the one that cracked us into Houston. And once we found out, or other locals found out that we were out there, they probably found out through people like Leslie. Mm-hmm. And it helped us as much as it helped them. Mm-hmm. So but that was our main goal, really, was to push the independents, the guys that were small label or no label, self-produced. Yeah. And we ended up getting music from all over the world. I mean, we were getting music on a regular basis from Germany, Country music is really hot in France and Germany and the Netherlands in particular, and the UK. But we were getting music from all of those places and playing it. And
Leslie has gone to all of those countries that you mentioned
I bet.
and played festivals.
They appreciate the old stuff.
Yes, they do.
They really do.
One of my recordings, I recorded a song called "Bubbles in My Beer" that was written by Cindy Walker and recorded by Bob Wills and a bunch of people, and it really went over big in Germany. And I think the quality of the song and the music is one thing, but I mean, where besides Germany would a song about beer be any bigger?
Well, and I always wondered though, can you have bubbles in hot beer? I don't know.
Yeah, maybe you could.
You get, I guess you do get a head on it though if it's hot. That's where
I guess
that's where that come from. I don't know.
I've really enjoyed the artists that we've had, but people who have been involved in roots country and bluegrass music that don't play or sing like you, Sam. I don't think. Maybe you've got a hidden side there that I don't know about yet, but
No. It's well hidden.
but I've really enjoyed having the people who work for the record companies and the different people involved in the industry besides the artists. But tell me about. I know you've told me a story about your grandmother. I guess lived over around Saratoga, Sour Lake
It's
somewhere.
actually my wife's grandmother.
Your wife's grandmother.
Right. Yeah.
Tell me that story.
They were living in Saratoga. I guess they probably hadn't been married too many years at the time. She was born in 1907, to give you kind of an idea of when we're talking here. And this would have been, she was probably in her, I don't know, 20s or 30s maybe, I'm guessing, when this happened. But the George Jones's family lived down the road from them, and she had a son who was a little younger than George, but occasionally George would come over and she'd watch him, I guess, pretty much during the day. And every time she mentioned it, because she knew I was a huge George Jones fan growing up, so every time she mentioned it, she called him snot-nosed Glenn, because she said every time she saw the boy, he had a runny nose. Never once without a runny nose.
Now,
So Glenn is his.
was George his real first name, or
I think it's George Glenn Jones.
okay? Was he known as George back then, or
No,
was he Glenn?
Glenn. He was
Okay.
Glenn. I don't know when he changed.
Glenn Jones.
He was Glenn for
Yeah.
a
I
long
didn't know
time.
that. That's
That's
interesting.
I think that's what some of his family, I think, were still calling him. I think was Glenn.
Really?
Right. I think his sisters probably. And
Or call him JG. I don't know.
there you go.
So
But anyway, so that was kind of coincidental that I was such a huge George Jones fan. And then turns out my wife's grandmother had an association with him, and they kind of kept track of him, because George came in and out of the Woodville area, Colemanville, Texas, and which is right outside of Woodville. He built Jones Country there for a little while. I think lost everything he had pretty much in the process, because nobody wanted to much drive out to Colemanville, Texas to see a concert.
Yeah.
And he was in Beaumont for a while. He had the Melody Ranch, out there for a while with a rodeo arena. And I think he put on one concert and lost so much money that was the end of it. But he built a full-size rodeo arena. Had the concert. I was there because I used to work with when I was in high school, I worked with a produce manager in a grocery store by the name of Jimmy Russell. And Jimmy was a good friend of George's. But Jimmy had quit the business because it was killing him. He had to get out before he drank himself, I think, to the grave. And he knew me and one other guy were really big fans of George. So whenever George was anywhere around Beaumont, he would bring us either over to the Melody Ranch or to George's shows. He always was giving us LPs every time they'd come out and that kind of thing. Yeah. But the one show I do remember, Merle Haggard showed up, and Merle was probably, he might have had 2 albums, might have been his second album, so he was a very young Merle Haggard, because this is probably 1965 or 6, and so second or third album at the most. And it was they played a long set in the front of the rodeo arena in between, that sort of a halftime rodeo show, and played all the big hits. The guitar licks and everything were just picture perfect. But I remember he had at the time, a big heavy set piano player, and they had all it was hot. It was summertime, and they'd all been drinking a lot of beer or whatever they were doing. But this poor piano player was in pretty bad shape, and right in the middle of one of the songs, he does a face plant right into the keyboard. I mean, just boom! You hear all the noise, and he pops back up, and he's played a completely different song. Oh. And Merle looks over at him and shrugs, and the whole band just switches to his song.
So, that's good.
So it was. It was probably such an informal setting that it was maybe a different side of Haggard than some of those guys.
That's a great story.
It is.
Your folks were classic rock and roll fans. That Lubbock guy,
Mr. Holly, Buddy Holly, they were.
So did they? So you then, as a young teenager, you're into Jones and Haggard or whatever. How did all that happen?
It was kind of funny. I remember when Buddy Holly died, it was such a traumatic day of mourning almost at the house, because my parents were, my mother in particular, but I think both of them were pretty much into Buddy Holly music, to the point where, and it was kind of funny, they were into 45 records at the time. So I've got a bunch of Coral records, Coral label records of Buddy Holly at the house today. And my mother used to listen to the radio all week long, AM station there out of Beaumont, and she'd make a list of the new records that she liked. And my dad would pick them up every Friday. He'd go to the one record store in Port Arthur, and he'd come home 5 or 6 new singles every week. Wow. And then we'd just play the heck out of that. And then they finally got into LPs a little bit. But I think the Buddy Holly thing really hit them because of J.P. Richardson dying at the same time. The Big Bopper dying with him because he was so local. And everybody in town, I was 8 years old when I guess I was 8 years old, maybe 10 years old when that happened. So I didn't know him as much as, Big Bopper as much, because he hadn't really done anything until Chantilly Lace came along. And all of his major success, unfortunately, came after he died. But then I heard George Jones, The Race Is On, 62, 63, something like that. So I must have been 9th or 10th grade, probably 9th grade. And that turned me into a country fan. And so and that's the song that did it. Wow. I remember very well that was the song, because I remember my dad, when I brought that 45 home, saying that he was surprised.
Yeah, and that was an up-tempo song, not
it was.
Too unlike some of the Buddy Holly songs. So then you expanded to just roots country generally, being a fan of it.
We had a station there in Beaumont. I think it was KTRM. Does that
sound right? Yeah. I got a cousin that lives over there, so I used to go over there when I was a kid. I remember listening to KTRM. Yeah.
And even when I was in high school, they were playing Hank Williams. This was, and I graduated '66. Yeah. So they were still playing Hank Williams, and he'd been dead 14, 15 years.
Oh yeah.
And so I ran with a bunch of buddies that were into country music, and that's pretty much all we listened to until we got closer to being 18 years old, and then realized that you only had to be 18 years old to drink in Louisiana, and you had to be 21 in those days in Texas. Yeah. So we would drive what we called across the river, the Sabine River. And there were some clubs right on the other side of the river, just on the other side of Vinton, Louisiana. I remember one called the Big Oak. I can't remember what the other two were called. But they were into soul music, blues. And so we got into that kind of stuff, and we became huge Otis Redding fans, and Wilson Pickett and some of those guys. And so I listened, and our whole group did. We listened to that kind of stuff as much as we did country for a long time. But country was always our first love, and I think every one of us came back to it. So
You know,
about-
earlier you had mentioned bluegrass and everything, and so you're kind of a bluegrass. You go to a lot of bluegrass festivals, and you got a lot of YouTube videos out there.
I do. I've probably got a little over maybe 100 to 150 of them on YouTube right now.
Wow.
But I've got probably 4 or 5 times that many at home that I've never put out because somebody walked in front of the camera or something, you know.
Been there, done that.
Yeah, that kind of thing. But I've got quite a collection, and it's mostly, or my favorite ones were all taken out of Owensboro, Kentucky, because there's the Bluegrass Museum and Hall of Fame is in Owensboro, Kentucky, just south of Indiana.
Some of the artists that you videotape, possibly.
Oh yeah, Doyle Lawson's group, a lot of Del McCurry, just tons of the older guys. Jim may remember Curly Sattler.
Oh yeah.
Got Curly when he was, I think Curly was 91 or 92 years old.
Wow.
And
He played mandolin for Flatt and Scruggs.
yeah, and but just a lot of guys of that era. But also, I never saw Jimmy Martin, and Jimmy was dead before I got into bluegrass, I guess, or I didn't know him.
Yeah.
I mean, I know his music, but
Sure.
you know, and him calling himself the king of bluegrass he was hard to ignore. But yeah, I got some video of his son. Jimmy Martin Jr. probably still has a band, and just even Emmylou Harris was out there one time. In fact, I've got a 10-minute sound check that Emmylou Harris did at 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning. Outdoors at Owensboro, and I've got it on YouTube.
I need to look that up. So people can just do a search on YouTube, Sam Sattler?
They will. I've got a channel out there. I've got about 1,500 subscribers.
Oh, cool.
On it.
Yeah, that's good.
And yeah, it'll come up. And I've been meaning to get back out there and going through my library to see what else I can put out there, because I've got just a ton of stuff. But it's a lot of the people that I've got that I'm proudest of are the ones that have no longer with us, because I was able to catch them at the tail end of their career.
Yeah.
And 7 or 8 of them have since gone been inducted into the Bluegrass Hall of Fame. And I think some of the other ones will. Larry Sparks is already in, but I love Larry Sparks. I think some of those guys, Larry Sparks and James King, had the most soulful voices.
Yeah.
I mean, that was really emotional music. And they couldn't, every song with those voices, they couldn't help it. But,
And of course, Keith Whitley and Sparks were with Ralph Stanley. In fact, I think Larry Sparks was the first replacement when Carter Stanley died, the famous Stanley brothers.
Larry Skaggs or... Oh, you...
No,
they were with...
Whitley?
Whitley came a little bit later, but Larry Sparks was the first replacement. He was just really young when Carter Stanley died.
You're right. I'm thinking of...
So Ricky Skaggs, though, he never played with Stanley?
Yes, he did.
He did, okay.
Yeah, he
Okay.
and Whitley together.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I was thinking they did. I was thinking
And
they did.
And then he and Whitley, they called it the second generation, I think.
Yeah.
They did some joint stuff. And Ralph Stanley played banjo on some of their recordings, I think. But I'm trying to think, when you talk about soulful, I was thinking of another replacement who played with Ralph Stanley that died in some kind of accident. That was one of the most soulful singers that I ever. But people who are really doing well now, Rhonda Vincent. You've got some Rhonda Vincent.
Got a lot of Rhonda Vincent. Yeah, some of hers I've taken that I've got out there were actually from Farmers Branch up near Dallas.
Yeah.
There's a bluegrass festival every October up there.
Yeah.
And one of my favorites of her is the time we lost power up there, and she jumped off the stage. Excuse me. She jumped off the stage and got her whole band down there, and they did an acoustic set.
Wow.
And it was like you were as close as we are, and you just stand there, and you had to get there pretty close to hear them, actually.
See, I've seen her mama, and her brother,
Darren.
Darren. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And I've seen them do a thing before on YouTube or something.
The Old Timers show.
It was. It
What's
was
what's that
like a
called?
family
Oh,
reunion,
yeah,
family
yeah.
reunion deal or
I've
something.
seen
But
those are good.
man, it was her mama.
She was good too.
She's
yeah.
good.
Yeah.
And of course, her brother now is Daly and
Vincent.
Vincent, I believe it is, or something. Like
Yeah.
that,
She did an interlude. She had the family bluegrass thing. They're from Missouri. She did that for a long time, and then she had her own band for a while, and then she did an interlude, and she went to Nashville and she did 2 country CDs. That's really great stuff. But that just that was tough
Yeah.
to get that to be accepted and to find a song, your first hit song. She had good material, but there wasn't anything in there that took off commercially. So then she came back to bluegrass, and then these last few years, she was doing some duets with Gene Watson and to me, one of the finest singers in country music that died of a stroke, heart attack.
Oh yeah.
Can't think of.
Yep. Trying to remember his name too, but I'm yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he had a blood clot. At this point, let's go and do our little game here. We do a little pick one and just can give you a couple of things, and you just steak or chicken,
Chicken.
rice or potatoes.
Rice.
Now that's interesting.
Well, I'm Cajun, so it's not a stretch.
No. Of course, you don't play a guitar, but I'm going to give you this one anyway. Gibson or Martin?
From what I have heard, probably Martin.
Okay.
I've got one.
I got one sitting back here behind you too. So yeah,
I've got one.
you do.
Steel or dobro?
Steel.
Oh, now that's interesting.
Yeah.
I don't like dobro.
You don't
I
like
know
dobro?
why.
Okay.
I always look at dobro as an interference
It's
in the song.
it's used more in bluegrass.
It is.
It is,
and that's
yeah.
why I thought it was kind of interesting because you do like bluegrass quite a bit. You do a lot of bluegrass stuff.
Probably because I love the mandolin. I think the mandolin is my favorite
Yeah.
instrument.
Oh, it is
Yeah.
good. I know this one already. Dogs or cats?
Dogs. no competition.
We already talked about that in
Yeah,
one
right.
little bit. Let's see here. Cornbread or rolls?
Cornbread.
See, we put a lot of food in this thing here.
You did.
You know,
We did a podcast about country foods.
we did. We did, and it was good.
It was.
Along with what we talked about.
Yes.
Because it was good too. One more here. John Wayne or Steve McQueen?
That's a tough one. Probably Steve McQueen.
Oh, okay.
I did just in July visit John Wayne's birthplace up in Iowa, and they got a great museum up there. But as far as movies go, probably McQueen.
Yeah. Okay.
You've visited every major and most of the minor battlegrounds in the Civil War. Tell me a little bit about you. You found out about some ancestors that fought in the war, and
Yeah, I always knew, Jim, that I had an ancestor. More obviously, because my roots are basically Louisiana. My father moved to Texas after World War II. He was a Normandy veteran and died 2 years ago. So I grew up in Texas, but my roots and family are really in Louisiana. So I always figured I had to have Confederate veterans in that branch. And I found one in particular that was with the 28th Louisiana Infantry, I think. And the records are so good to this day that I was able to track down pretty much his history. You can actually get the daily roll call records even and find out when a guy's there or in sick bay or AWOL, for that matter. So I was able to find out where he fought and go up. And he fought in the Eastern Theater pretty much. From Shiloh, from some fighting in Louisiana, but all the way to Shiloh over at Tennessee, and where he was wounded. He was actually captured later on and sent home, and never went back, and was marked AWOL by his unit at that point. But I more recently found that I have he was a Guidry. And I more recently found out that on the Sattler side that I also have a relative of the same vintage who fought for the Union He was a Texan, a German immigrant.
A lot of Texans fought for the Union.
Well, according to the reading I've done, there was only 750 of them.
Is it really? Okay, I thought it was more than that.
I only got one source though.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I wouldn't swear to that.
No, I was thinking because and this is just some documentaries that I've seen that there was quite a few Texans that actually went and fought for the Union.
Well, I know there were a lot of Germans who refused to fight, period, and were actually massacred by some of the Confederates that were stationed in Texas. Yeah. But anyway, he joined the cavalry unit and fought for the Union, and later came home and was one of the 4 or 5 founders in New Braunfels. And to this day, there's a little town just outside of Round Rock called Sattler, and it's basically 2 city limit signs, and it's literally don't blink because it's about one block long. Yeah. But it's still called that because he was the postmaster for that area sometime before the war, and they call it the Sattler Post Office, and the little settlement became known as Sattler. So it's I became intrigued by the Civil War mainly because of the family connections, because I realized soon on that my grandmother, who lived up into her late 80s, it was her grandfather that fought in the Civil War, and she remembered stories, from those days, and so she was as close to the Civil War veteran as I was to her, and as a kid that seemed kind of strange. So I started in the early 90s probably making trips, maybe the late 80s, making trips to the various battlegrounds, in particular the ones where I knew he had fought, and a lot of the battlegrounds you can still see the trenches and the embankments that they hid behind and where they placed all the artillery, and it's all still there and very well preserved. And it was always found it kind of eerie to go there late in the day, right around sunset, or very early in the morning around daybreak, and walk some of those trenches when nobody else is around, and realizing that I had a direct ancestor who was there under totally different conditions, but it just makes history real. So it became kind of a hobby.
Yeah.
How many trips would you say? I mean, sometimes you went about every year, didn't you?
Oh, I did go every year. Yeah. Once, more recently, I've been going west because I've neglected that part of the country, but not all the way to California, Oregon. But I've been doing the Nebraska, Utah, Montana, Wyoming trips. But
there were battles fought that far
no,
west?
No. This was just my summer trips. I've kind of neglected the Civil War for the last 3 or 4 years, especially with that COVID interruption too.
Yeah, absolutely.
But then then there were the years I would combine the trips with baseball. I'd try to hit as many major league ballparks as I could, so I was in and out, zigzagging around for 2 weeks and just hitting what I could. And then the bluegrass trips took away some of my time too.
I think that we haven't talked really much about the bluegrass festivals, but I have found that the average fan at a bluegrass festival is not somebody who knows a lot about the Stanley Brothers and Flatt and Scruggs, but a lot of those people are retired folks with a motorhome or a camper.
They are.
Who were big fans of Haggard and Jones, and because of where country music is now as far as the mainstream, they have found bluegrass bands presenting the kind of rootsy music that they had in old country, and Sam,
because you just can't do contemporary bluegrass. That don't work too good. You still got
what they're doing now, Andy, and it's irritating to me is they're almost making the same mistake that country music made.
Yes,
they've changed in the last 8 or 9 years.
Really? Okay, see, I haven't.
To the point where you're almost going to a jazz festival now.
Oh,
when you go
wow.
Everybody wants to riff for, 5 minutes, and it's just, and I get lost. I don't even, I'm bored with that after a while.
Oh, yeah.
And it's really a shame. And I think it all started, well, that's not really the fault. The festival scene itself, I think, changed in 2007, or maybe I think it was 7. No, it was 2010. Steve Martin showed up playing festivals with the, I can't think of the band he's with.
It's all banjos.
It's all banjos.
They have an upright bass or something, but there's a lot of other banjo.
Well, he showed up, and it drew a completely different crowd to the
yeah.
festival
Oh,
that
yeah.
year. And they made so much money that year in Owensboro that I still believe to this day that that's when they started bringing in the bands that were a little more contemporary.
Yeah.
And the older guys started being phased out.
Yeah.
Too
bad.
Yeah, it really was. Yeah. Bluegrass festivals have a customary way that they're run, and fans know it. You bring your chair out there the night before the festival, and you park it in front of the stage.
That's your ticket.
That's
your seat.
That's your seat, and as long as you leave it there, that's your seat. Now, if you're not sitting in it, anybody's welcome to sit in it. But when you show up, the courtesy is that they get up and they give you your seat.
Get out of my chair.
And a lot of people.
That's my chair. I think that was a song, wasn't it?
And you don't stand up in front of the stage.
Yeah.
You do not
Right.
block the view of the first 3 or 4 rows because it is mostly older people who are sitting down.
Yeah.
They don't want to stand up.
No.
And when they brought Steve Martin in, and there was supposed to be no smoking, supposed to be no drinking in the seating area. They couldn't control the crowd that came in. It was younger people. It was people in there, which was good for the music in one sense. It was 20s and 30s and 40-year-olds, mostly 20s and 30s. And they decided to make it into a rock festival. And so they were jumping up and down and dancing in front of the stage and smoking to the point where some of the artists were starting to complain that if you don't stop, I can't go on. It's bothering my throat.
Right.
And so the older people quit going as much as they did and started looking for new festivals. And
I would say that, what they do at the festival, they'll have starting about noon and going to midnight, one band after another. And some of the more progressive festivals. Now, you would still have a few smaller traditional festivals, but in a bigger festival with that many bands, they might only have 2 or 3 traditional sounding bluegrass bands, the McCurrys. And,
The thing I always loved about the bluegrass festivals was that the artists were so available. They were there. They were walking around.
Yeah.
If when their set was done, you might look over and see one sitting right next to you in somebody else's chair because he wanted to see what the other guys were doing.
Yep. Oh yeah.
And they'd talk to you, and you got to be friends with them. And
Yeah.
I mean, I remember Owensboro in June. It's always the 3rd week of June, and there's always at least once in that 4-day festival, you're going to get the biggest thunderstorm you've ever seen in your life, just like coming off the Gulf Coast. I mean, lightning and thunder and a deluge of 2-3 inches of rain. And that park they hold it in has got a lot of peaks and valleys, so the drainage became a problem. And then, of course, you couldn't be on stage during a lightning storm. And so I remember Kenny and Amanda Smith one year were taking requests from the stage, and this woman had finally patiently waited for her song to come on, and the lights went out. The electricity went off. So Amanda told her, well, come over to our merch tent, and we'll do the song for you. Kenny and I'll sing it for you. So it stopped raining, but the power was still off. So I walked over to the merch tent and was going to buy a CD, and the woman showed up about 5 minutes later, and then the rain started coming again. And so Kenny and Amanda and me and this woman were stuck under this tent about the size of this room for 30 minutes. And they did 3 or 4 songs, just the two of them, just singing to 2 people.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's the difference to me between bluegrass festivals and any other kind
It's
of
more of
festival.
a personal thing than a regular concert that you would go to.
There was one year the same thing happened, and we sat in our cars for like 6 hours waiting for the power to come back up. Well, by the time the power came on, it was dark. And, I'm sorry, that day the power never did come back, but it was dark. And somebody came around knocking on all the windows of the cars saying, come under the big tent. We'll perform there for a while. Well, there were only like 100 of us left in the crowd. We got under this tent, and Marty Stewart and Del McCurry's band did an acoustic set for an hour and a half.
Wow.
And we were here, we're sitting at their feet basically with flashlights put them on so they could see their fingers sometimes.
Right.
And they didn't have to do that.
No.
But they did. And that's why, that's the difference, I think, between bluegrass and a lot of other music, even country music.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Well, that even country music is a segue into what we'll have to have you back to talk about. But the the evolution of country away from traditional country music, away from fiddle and steel, and the Giesenslaws did from Austin. They did a song entitled "They Call It Country, We Call It Bad Rock and Roll."
Yeah.
but
Right on it, too.
I've talked to a couple of people that we've had on the podcast about our music, our traditional country music. What hope is there for it? Jeff Woolsey, we had him on, and he exclusively plays dance halls. Mm-hmm. And so that's something that isn't really going away for him. You know, they've actually got a few kind of new dance halls that they've added. But that's, I mean, every one of those is in Texas. He's not playing one show outside the state.
Mm-hmm. And well, you know, I was just kind of, we're just kind of out of time just about here. Actually, we went over a little bit, but that's okay too. Yeah. But we just want to say thanks to Sam for being here. This has been a very informative and very interesting
Thanks for having me.
Conversation.
Yes. He's been a good friend to me for
a
long time.
Yeah. Since 2003.
So
and he's quite a historian about
absolutely
matters general, not just music. He's done his homework, and it's something he loves. He loves music. He has all of his life.
Yeah, and it shows.
Yes,
it shows for sure. Well, once again, Sam, thanks for being with us, man. We sure do appreciate it. And folks want to go to your YouTube channel. You've got some videos up, as you said earlier. So how do they, what do they need to type in probably
just
to get
my
there?
name.
Just your name, okay.
Yeah, it'll come up.
Okay.
I've got a separate channel. Okay. It will come up.
Yeah. All right. That sounds good. Sounds good. Well, man, I tell you what, I appreciate you being with us. And folks, we'll see y'all on the next one.
Adios.
Thanks for listening to The Big Show with Andy Gallo and Country Jim.
This has been a Unicap Media presentation.